Hello. Hello. John Beattie here, International Director of the British People's League. This is the Dinosaur News, brought to you today, March 26, 2014. How are you anyway? We're feeling good. Still don't have to do a Lush Limbaugh, nearly said. Rush Limbaugh. Still don't have to follow the episodes where he had to take pills to keep Spark alive. I hate to disappoint some critics out there who think I'm getting old. You're only as old as you feel. I can ride a bicycle. I can do things that any 30-year-old can do. So no problem there. I'll still be at this years from when others have packed it in. Speaking of packing it in, it's still a disappointment over the years, the different young ones you meet who are full of vim and vigor for the history of our ancestors, proud of their British traditions and their British family. And then they just join the multi-cult world as if it never happened. On the other hand, we have our steady rocks of Gibraltar. Those on our blind list who give steady, great insight, encouragement, advice, you name it. So we're doing okay. So today's Dinosaur News, we're going to carry on with the introduction to the book that I've been trying to finish up for a long time, too long. Canada's Secret Civil War, 1978-2 with a question mark. So carrying on from yesterday's reading, we'll just go into the one paragraph as a refresher. So, what have we so far? A few piddly news clips, and I'm supposed to convince you that a secret civil war was taking place in Canada. Only in Canada, you say? Name one other country in the history of Western civilization whose constitution was changed unilaterally without the will of the people and no shots fired? The threat of Quebec secession, Trudeau changing the laws governing the very social fabric of Canada, and with all this, the British Canadian elite is just supposed to sit back and smile? History and human nature do not respond this way at all. Time now to exemplify somewhat in detail. Cancer unfortunately killed my wife, Hazel, in 1996. I have received permission from our son to name her and her heroic tie-in, she being the go-between myself and the command structure. Meetings were held in the boardroom of the Wellesley Hospital on Sherbourne Street, south of Bloor Street, in downtown Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Coincidentally, the boys, from now on the command structure will be referred to as the boys, quotes. They have my family tucked away exactly across the street from the Wellesley in the bunker building at 565 Sherbourne Street, 7th floor, corner of the 7th floor. Being employed as a highly respected charge nurse with great seniority at the Wellesley Hospital, convenient and expedient for the briefings to yours truly, to be passed on by Courier Hazel. Daily briefings 24/7 with full details. Many of these details can now be revealed. Elsewhere in the book, I'm going to get at how these reporting sessions they killed the nerves of Hazel, and may have just killed her. It was just horrible. She had to report the good news and the bad news, and sit in on board meetings, working. Well, I guess she put in 3 shifts a week. We had 3 kids. But these reports, I mean, how would you like to be the key reporter to an ongoing secret civil war? Most Canadians would obviously think a hidden secret civil war would be impossible in our Dominion of Canada. Most hear of the opening shots, the beginnings, verifying that I am off my rocker. Our evidence is produced, proof beyond doubt that actions of a secret civil war did take place in Canada, coast to coast. Started with the opening shots being fired on Boxing Day 1978. Secret Civil War snippets. Scenario: midnight explosions, mysterious daylight hydro blackouts in Canadian cities, overabundance of train derailments. All this, folks, the late 70s, the early 80s. Overabundance of train derailments, including the Mississauga train derailment. Suspicious fires such as the Women's McGill Club building in Toronto. The historic Rideau Club building in Ottawa, both being burned to the ground. Joe Clark actually witnessed the Rideau Club burning from his Ottawa Parliament office window. Mysterious explosion at CFRB radio station in Toronto, at the same time as unexplained massive holes in plaster at Queen's Park, Ontario Government Building. All this while Ontario Premier Bill Davis welcomes more than a dozen Soviet representatives into the legislature in Toronto, while the nervous politicians applauded wildly. Pierre's sudden decision to resign after a walk in the snow. Pierre's cabinet having all kinds of peculiar physical accidents. John Munro falling in his bathtub with severe bruises resulting. Don Jameson falling onto rocks with near death resulting. This is just scratching the surface. Pierre's retirement audience, right across the street from the Cuban embassy for 24-hour protection, perhaps? I'm going to read that paragraph again. Pierre suddenly decided to resign after a walk in the snow. Pierre's cabinet having all kinds of peculiar physical accidents. John Munro falling in his bathtub with severe bruises resulting. Don Jameson falling onto rocks with near death resulting. This is just scratching the surface. Pierre's retirement residence right across the street from the Cuban embassy for 20-hour protection, 24-hour protection perhaps. Obviously, two sides make for a civil war. Two sides make for a Canadian civil war, secret or not. Neither side wanted it acknowledged by the general public, as the Canadian dollar would have dropped to zilch value. Neither side wanted it acknowledged by the general public, as the Canadian dollar would have dropped to zilch value. The only way each side could report to those on the edges of each camp was via mysteriously coded news clips, intentionally inserted in the daily press, as referred to in the introduction herein. The only way each side could report to those on the edges of each camp as to goings-on was via mysteriously coded news clips, intentionally inserted in the daily press, as referred to in the introduction herein. Wounded and dying from our side cared for at the Wellesley Hospital east of Yonge Street in downtown Toronto. Wounded from the multicultural side cared for at a well-known hospital west of Yonge Street. Now, that's the introduction to whet your appetite. You have to re-listen to the broadcast yesterday, the 25th of March, and then pay attention to what was said today. That's just the beginning. The book is going to be thick and big, 400 to 500 pages. Incident after incident after incident. When I think of them all in the year 2014, I can hardly believe it. All these years later. It happened, it took place. Both sides just packed it in. Neither side was a winner. In a way, I suppose our side was a winner in that yours truly is talking to you about it right now. And there are sons and daughters of those who passed away, who died in the dead of night activity to preserve Canada as a whole, to prevent Quebec from separating, and they succeeded in that regard. Quebec didn't separate. Oh, there's clippings galore we've got to refer to in the book. Tanks going downtown Montreal. Tanks downtown Montreal. A teeny little teeny snippet in the news media. You think that didn't change the Quebecers' minds about leaving? They decided to stay with a little persuasion, with a little bit of help from our friends. And from the looks of things, I don't think we have to worry about Quebec separation being a big issue now. Apparently the Liberals are doing pretty good in Quebec. Liberal isn't this guy's name tag. However, anything to keep Quebec in Canada. It's part of our treasured history. I get along with French Canadians. As I said in previous shows, I served a stretch with the Royal Canadian Air Force. Oh, Saint-Hubert, NATO Command Headquarters. NORAD, I keep switching the two. NORAD Command Headquarters, Saint-Hubert, Quebec, just outside of Montreal. I always get along with French Canadians. Social credit leader Riel Cowett had dinner with him, his deputy Gilles Rondeau, etc. Okay, but back to the book. Now this little bit gets cute too. It's ironic. Some of my videos are being played in circles that aren't exactly in favor of the British People's League, in what you might call the multi-cult enemy camp. And they're relishing in the fact that Beattie doesn't get along with some so-called right-wing types. Well, that's been ongoing for a few years, because I have my toe in with the establishment, whereas none of the radical right have enough brains to stay tuned in with the real world. Back then it was worse. Our boys wanted some of the radical right to pitch in our camp. We needed anyone we could get. It was a struggle. In the dead of night, Trudeau was bringing in armed people from a lot of the communist world at that time, including Cuba. We needed every bit of help we could get. The radical right were approached in so many ways without it being said, hey, would you like in on that thing Beattie's in on? Well, guess what? The poor little darlings are so jealous of John Beattie, always have been and always will be, and I still don't know why. As the opposition comments and critics, especially this week for some reason, are hitting hard and heavy. I mean, Beattie's just an old incoherent, old fuddly done, old codger. On and on goes the show. Listen, boys and girls, you ain't old till you're dead. And if you think that my age is going to protect your skullduggery, you better think again. Anyway, back to the idea of the right wing back in the late 70s, early 80s, getting in on our administrative attempt. Well, I have to tell you, there was a plot to kill Johnny Boy here. But that's nothing new. A stooge that worked for the RCMP back in the early 80s at the same time, a guy named Wolfgang Droz and another guy named Toop, Robert Toop. Toop was leaving off the balcony of another rightist in Toronto with a loaded shotgun and was going to kill Johnny Beattie. That was the headlines in the Globe and Mail. Headlines. Was anyone arrested? Of course not. Ha. Sometimes you use the corny analogy of a football game. They're all out there tearing each other's guts out. Beattie's the football. I've been kicked around a lot, but guess what? I'm still on the field. The football's still on the field. The players have come and gone. This boy's going to be around to see total victory for our British way of life. Here in Canada, the motherland, Australia, New Zealand, you name it. Once we get in a big role, you'll see. And if this could happen in the early 80s, the late 70s, early 80s, it can happen again. The children of the major players are still in their key positions in the establishment in our society, in our British Canadian white society. So, in the book itself, Chapter 1, The Plot to Kill John Beattie. A cunning death plot to have me murdered by whom? Well-known Toronto right-wing characters were to push me out of the back of a van speeding along Ontario's Highway 401. Of course, included in their plan was to have me plied with liquor. Oh my! Drunken Beattie found dead in ditch of Highway 401. The rightists were berserk with jealousy at being completely excluded from our patriotic camp. John Ross Taylor was fed enough information about the ongoing war, and especially with choice public news clips. He photostated same and passed them on to his rightist contacts with great glee that he was in on something big. He even put pieces on his telephone broadcast machines that got him into a bit of trouble. The rightists were terrified that their lives might not be too comfortable after we succeeded in broadcasting our new administration via national outlets. Announcement broadcaster, Beattie. I can slip this in now. I used to drive poor Hazel bananas, getting her to take questions back to the command structure. At a major one day, I said, look, why, with my youthful stupidity and my youthful bad acts, why would the establishment Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Celtic remains here in Canada with this administrative coup attempt, why would they have me as a spokesperson with my past? So dutifully, Hazel puts it to the big shots that she met every day, 7 days a week. She came back with the answer to that one was, look, if Charles Deering of CFRB News got on and said there's been an administrative coup in Canada overnight, everything remains the same, our constitutional monarch, but the only flags that will be flown will be the red ensign, etc., but just carry on with life, everything will be the same pretty well, but this new administrative coup has taken place. So that'd be Charles Deering of CFRB, or say Gordon Sinclair, or Gord Wilson, all the old-time Anglo announcers at that time. Nobody would think anything happened if it was just the regular news announcers. But you put a lunatic like Beattie as the spokesperson, you turn on their newscast and they hear the voice of John Beattie, the John Beattie, they're going to know this is for real. It'll shock the public. It will, as if hopefully there'll be a second kick at the can. So that was the reason given that Beattie would be in on the deal. Plus the fact that they felt I had guts, that I wouldn't give in, and my upbringing, my upraising, my RCAF days, etc. But do check out Administrator in Canada's Constitution. So I'm wandering a bit from the script here, tying in parts of the book, and actually I may do that for some time. News of great import for the British People's League, any side issues will always be brought in, but we're going to make the book sort of the entertainment value of these shows for a time to come. Plus, it's going to force me to get the book finished. So, the right-wing misfits were too stupid to see that their discovered murder plot was all set up by their own enemy. More on that tomorrow. So that's it for today. Hope we've whet your appetite. Friends, enemies, etc. out there, I'm pleased to have all of you tuned in. Goodbye till tomorrow.